It started innocently enough, or so I thought. The day my husband walked into our room after we'd put the kids to bed. I didn't expect what he was about to say. He's always been one for serious talks, especially when he says, "We need to talk." But this time, I knew it was about sex. The words he said caught me completely off guard. "I can't do this anymore," he began, and the tears that followed immediately shattered my heart. My husband, my strong, composed husband, was crying. I hadn't seen him like this before. His voice was broken as he explained that he couldn't keep living in a marriage where sex was so infrequent. He said he loved me and would always love me, but the lack of intimacy was breaking him. Then he dropped the bombshell. He gave me an ultimatum. He told me that I had two choices: either we open up our marriage or we divorce. I don't know if it was the shock or the hurt, but the room felt like it was closing in on me. I never imagined we'd reach this point. We'd been together for 9 years, married for 6, and we had 2 beautiful sons, 4 and 3. We were a family. Sure, we had our struggles, but who doesn't? He made $400,000 a year working from home with a flexible schedule. So I'd stopped working after our first son was born. I focused on the kids. And we had a good routine. He was incredibly organized and meticulous, especially when it came to cooking, which was one of his great passions. He cooked more than half of our meals and loved it. He also adored spending time with the kids. We had a good balance, or at least I thought we did. Before we had kids, sex was a regular part of our relationship, often multiple times a day. We didn't have to think about it, it was just natural. But when we decided to start a family, we knew things would change. We discussed the possibility that sex might become less frequent, and it seemed like something we could handle. When I got pregnant with our first son, we had sex regularly, but after the birth, everything shifted. I felt like I had no libido at all. My body had just gone through something monumental, and I felt exhausted. My husband was understanding, though. He told me that it made sense that my body needed time to heal and focus on other things. For the next couple of years, our sex life slowed down, but it didn't feel like a crisis. Then, when our youngest was around 18 months old, he started initiating more often, again mornings and nights. But I kept turning him down. I wasn't feeling the desire for sex, and I had a hard time understanding why. Eventually, after months of this, he asked me gently if there was something he could do to help me get my drive back. The question threw me off. I didn't respond well. I felt upset and guilty, and that led to our first real fight. We apologized afterward, but the damage was done. A few weeks later, he asked me again about seeing a therapist or doing something to address our intimacy issues. He suggested couples therapy, and I agreed. I even saw an endocrinologist to see if something physical was affecting me, but the hormone tests came back normal. We tried a few therapists, but they both basically said his expectations were unrealistic and that partnerships require compromise. My husband's response was that he wasn't ready to compromise on something that was so important to him. He was asked if sex was more important than a healthy marriage, and while he said no, I couldn't help but notice the hesitation in his voice. After that, things started to change in our marriage. I noticed a decrease in emotional affection from him. It wasn't obvious at first, but it was there. He was still caring and attentive, but there was a lack of depth in the intimacy that had been so present in the early years of our relationship. He also stopped initiating sex as often, which I hoped meant he was becoming more comfortable with our new reality. But when I brought it up, he explained that being rejected multiple times a week wasn't healthy for him emotionally. So he started balancing how often he initiated with how much rejection he could handle. I was devastated. He said he understood that I wasn't rejecting him out of any lack of love, but it didn't make it hurt any less. I tried to get him to go to therapy by himself, but he refused. He said, everyone processes things differently, and therapy wasn't something he believed in. So, life went on in a kind of stasis. I thought that this was just the way things would be now. But last night, things came to a head. When he walked into our room after putting the kids down, I knew. This was it. We were going to talk about sex again. What I wasn't prepared for was the pain in his voice and the weight of his words. He said he couldn't live like this anymore. He told me that he had 2 options in mind, divorce or opening up the marriage. He He needed someone else to meet his sexual needs. He said. He was so calm while saying this, and it only made it worse. I was blindsided. I felt devastated, furious, and a little bit pathetic all at once. I yelled. I cried. I said things I didn't mean. And through all of that, he stayed remarkably calm. He wouldn't have a conversation with me if I kept yelling, so I eventually calmed down. I begged him to try to rekindle our sex life. I even tried to initiate right then and there, which in hindsight is incredibly embarrassing. But he rejected me. He said that if we were to work on things, I couldn't just have sex when I didn't really want to. He needed to go elsewhere to get his needs met for now. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to open up our marriage. I begged him to work it out, to try harder, but he said he needed space. He was going to stay with a friend for the night. That was the last straw. My world felt like it was collapsing, and the thought of him sleeping with someone else was unbearable. I didn't know what to do. The only thing I knew was that I didn't want to lose him. The next morning, I texted him. I told him not to come back, that I was taking the kids to visit my parents for a couple of days. I wasn't sure what I was looking for: advice, support, or just someone to listen. My parents could tell something was wrong, and worse, our kids could tell too. I felt like I was falling apart. My husband said that if we stayed together and I continued rejecting him, he would end up resenting me. He said it was better for our kids to have separate parents than parents who resented each other. I was stuck. Do I open up the marriage or go through with the divorce? I didn't have answers, but I knew I needed some time to figure it out. The following days felt like an emotional whirlwind. I couldn't believe we were at this point. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of everything. I was still processing the devastation of the ultimatum. And now, in the quiet of my parents' house, with my kids playing happily in the yard, I had the space to think. But all I could think about was how much I didn't want to lose my husband. I didn't want our family to break apart, yet everything I knew about our relationship was suddenly being challenged. I spent most of the day talking with my mum. She's been my rock through so many things, and I found myself leaning on her more than ever. She listened as I poured my heart out. I told her everything, the love I still had for him, the hurt, the anger, and the confusion. She didn't give me easy answers, but she gave me something more important: perspective. She reminded me that relationships go through seasons, and sometimes the changes we least expect can shake us to our core. But she also reminded me that a healthy relationship, one that is built on love and trust, is worth fighting for even when things feel impossible. That night, I realized that I wasn't ready to give up on us. I wasn't ready to let go of the man I fell in love with. We had so much history, so much shared joy. Was I really willing to walk away from all of that because of something as difficult as this? At the same time, I couldn't ignore the truth that had been lingering in my heart for months. My husband's needs were not being met, and neither were mine. It wasn't just about the physical aspect of sex, it was about emotional connection, about intimacy, about how we felt seen and cared for by each other. And somewhere along the way, we had both stopped being able to see each other the way we once had. My rejection wasn't about him as a person. It wasn't even about love or desire. It was just a physical and emotional disconnect that I couldn't figure out how to bridge. The conversations I'd had with my mum were comforting, but they didn't solve the problem. I was still stuck between two choices: divorce or opening up our marriage. Neither option felt right. But I also didn't know how else to move forward. I didn't want him to be with someone else, but I didn't know how I could meet his needs either. Every scenario felt like a lose-lose. The morning after our intense conversation, I sent him a text to tell him I was taking the kids to my parents' place for a few days. He agreed, though he seemed hesitant. Part of me knew he just wanted space too, and I figured a few days apart would give us both the time to clear our heads. As I sat there with my mum, trying to make sense of everything, I couldn't help but feel the immense weight of this situation. There was no escaping the fact that he was hurting, that he needed something I couldn't give him. The thought of him finding someone else to fulfill those needs was suffocating. It made my heart ache just thinking about it. But part of me understood that I couldn't keep trying to deny the reality of the situation. We both needed change. I called my husband later that day. It was the first time we had talked since he left, and it was tense. He sounded calm, but I could tell he was still processing everything. He apologized again, said he was still struggling with how to handle his emotions. He said he didn't want to hurt me, but that he couldn't live like this anymore. He was still asking for space, and I was too emotional to talk about anything practical. I told him that I didn't want to open up the marriage, but that I didn't know where to go from here. He didn't push the issue, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. The next few days were difficult. My mind kept racing. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, and I would think about all the things he had said, the ultimatum, the pain, the anger. It felt like I was losing him. And yet part of me couldn't blame him for feeling the way he did. I wasn't meeting his needs, and that was causing a deep rift between us. I thought a lot about the advice people had been giving me. Many said that divorce was the only option, that he was being selfish and immature, that he wasn't respecting me or my feelings. But I knew my husband better than anyone. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was in pain, and he had been for months, if not longer. His need for intimacy, his desire for connection, wasn't just about sex, it was about feeling loved and wanted. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped being able to give him that in the way he needed. I started to realize that, yes, there was selfishness on his part, but there was also an immense amount of fear of abandonment, fear of being unloved, and I couldn't blame him for that. I had my own fears too. The thought of losing him, of him seeking someone else to fill the void that I couldn't, was terrifying. I wasn't ready to give up on him, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore how badly he was suffering. By the time I spoke to my husband again, I had come to a difficult conclusion. I needed to meet him where he was. I couldn't keep ignoring the emotional toll our lack of intimacy had taken on him. And while I wasn't ready to open up the marriage, I knew that we needed something drastic to happen if we were going to make it through this. We decided to take some time to think things over. I was still in limbo, unsure of what I should do next. I wasn't sure if I could open up the marriage, but I also knew that I couldn't continue pretending that everything would be okay if I just ignored the issues. I had to make a decision about our future, about whether we could rebuild what we once had, or whether it was time to let go. The pain of seeing my husband so vulnerable, so broken, was weighing on me. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had hurt him, that I hadn't understood his needs as deeply as I thought I did, but the thought of him being with someone else, of losing him, was a pain I couldn't bear. I knew that whatever came next, it was going to be a hard journey, but for the first time in days, I began to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way forward. Maybe we could rebuild this. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was worth fighting for. The days that followed felt like I was walking on a tightrope, balancing between the urge to scream, to break down, and the need to keep it together for the sake of my family. I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Every conversation with my husband felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure of whether we were going to fall or find a way back to solid ground. I kept thinking about how everything changed after we had kids. I didn't expect things to stay exactly the same, of course. Parenthood would shift our dynamics, but I never imagined it would bring us to this point. It had been hard enough when our sex life started to slow down after our first son was born, but then it kept going downhill, and I couldn't pinpoint why. I felt disconnected from myself, and my husband, the man who used to make me feel alive with just a touch, seemed like a stranger at times. It wasn't that I didn't love him, it wasn't that I didn't care, but something had shifted, and no matter how much I tried to force it, I couldn't bring myself back to that place. I spent hours thinking about the ultimatum, trying to piece together the logic behind it. It wasn't just about the sex. I realized, slowly and painfully, that my husband's need for intimacy went far deeper than just physical pleasure. It was about emotional validation. Sex was his way of connecting, of reaffirming his place in the world, his worth in our relationship. I could see that now, even though at first I had viewed it as selfishness, but it wasn't. It was a cry for help. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that my reluctance to meet his sexual needs hadn't just hurt him, it had eroded his sense of security, his sense of belonging. And that realization hit me harder than I ever expected. I had been so wrapped up in my own struggles, my exhaustion, my lack of desire, The challenges of being a stay-at-home mom, that I had failed to see how deeply this was affecting him. He wasn't just losing out on sex, he was losing the intimacy that had been the cornerstone of our relationship. And I had been too blind to notice until it was almost too late. When I spoke to my husband again, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He hadn't been sleeping well. He had been staying at his friend's house, the one he had known since college, and his absence left a vacuum in our home that was impossible to ignore. I knew I wasn't the only one struggling with this. He had to be hurting just as much as I was. I don't know what to do anymore, he said, his voice raw. I don't want to lose you, but I can't keep living like this. It's eating me alive, and I don't know how to fix it. I felt a pang of guilt. I wanted to reach through the phone and hold him. I wanted to tell him that everything would be okay, that we could fix it, that this was just a bump in the road. But the reality was, we had both contributed to this breakdown. It wasn't one-sided. We both had to take responsibility for where we were. I know, I whispered, my voice breaking. I don't want to lose you either. We agreed to meet again, in person, to talk. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew we couldn't keep avoiding it. I needed to hear him say what was in his heart, and I needed to say what was in mine. We were both scared, but I knew that this conversation was inevitable. When I arrived at our house, the tension in the air was palpable. He was already sitting at the kitchen table, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a matter of days. There was no trace of the confident, composed person I had married. He looked like he had been worn down by the weight of the decisions we both had to make. He didn't look at me when I walked in, but I could feel his gaze on me from the moment I sat down. How are the boys? He asked, his voice quiet, almost distant. They're fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They're having fun with my parents. You don't have to worry about them. I paused, searching for the right words. I'm here because you asked me to come. So, tell me what you want to say. His eyes flickered, and I saw a flash of frustration in his expression. I should have handled this better. I know that. I should have been clearer, but it's been so hard. He sighed, rubbing his face as if the weight of it all had become too much for him to bear. I've been thinking, he continued, about everything we talked about before, about opening up the marriage. And honestly, I think that was a desperate thought. It won't fix anything. I just thought I needed someone, but that's not the answer. The answer is that I need to be okay with myself first. I felt a flicker of hope. So, what does that mean? What do we do now? He looked at me, eyes filled with uncertainty. I think the only way forward is for us to separate for a while. I've been approved for 3 months off work, and I need to figure out who I am without this constant pressure. I'm breaking up, and I need to process this. I don't want to hurt you anymore. The words felt like they were being torn from his chest, each one heavy with pain. My heart broke as I listened to him. It wasn't just about our marriage, it was about everything he had been carrying for years. I could see the burden he had been carrying, even though he hadn't spoken about it until now. I don't want this, I whispered, barely able to hold back the tears. I don't want to lose you. You're the only person I've ever truly wanted. I can't imagine waking up without you. I'm so sorry that I didn't realize how badly this was affecting you. He reached across the table, his hand shaking slightly. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but I don't know what else to do. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when I feel like I'm suffocating. I could feel the cracks in my heart deepen, but I also knew that if we didn't face this, it would tear us apart completely. I took a deep breath, fighting back the tears. If you're sure this is what you need, then I will try. I'll give you the space you need, but please, don't let this be the end. We sat in silence for a long moment, just holding each other's gaze. It wasn't a conversation I ever thought we'd have, and yet, it felt like we were finally getting to the heart of things. I could see the pain in his eyes, and I knew he wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for us. I'll go to therapy, he said, breaking the silence. I've been avoiding it, but if I'm going to fix this, I need to work on myself, and I want to work on us. I'll do it. I'll make it happen. The words gave me hope. Even though I knew the road ahead would be difficult, I nodded, squeezing his hand. I'll be here. We'll figure this out together. In that moment, I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. We were still standing. And as long as we could keep fighting for what we had. The weeks that followed were filled with more emotions than I ever thought possible. It was like we were stuck in a suspended state, hovering between hope and despair, constantly questioning whether the effort was worth it, whether we could really rebuild what had been broken. But we both knew something important. We weren't ready to give up. Not yet. The hardest part, beyond the initial shock of his ultimatum, was learning how to communicate openly without the fear of rejection or resentment lingering in the air. Every conversation felt so raw. Sometimes it felt like the smallest thing could set us off, but we knew it had to be done. There were days where I could feel the tension between us, the weight of everything we had said and not said, and on those days, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end. But there were also moments of connection, moments when I could see the man I fell in love with, the man who cared deeply for our family. And in those moments, I knew we still had a chance. The therapy sessions were difficult. They weren't magic fixes, but they opened up doors we hadn't even known were closed. We learned to listen, really listen to each other. I realized how much I had taken for granted, how I hadn't truly understood the emotional toll my lack of intimacy was having on him. He learned to recognize that my decrease in libido wasn't a rejection of him personally. It wasn't about love or desire, but about the physical and emotional exhaustion of motherhood. Our therapist helped us develop new tools to talk about intimacy. For the first time in years, we didn't shy away from the hard conversations. Instead, we leaned into them. We took the time to understand why things had shifted, why we had drifted so far apart. It was humbling to see how much work we both needed to do, but I also felt a glimmer of hope that we could get through this. If we were willing to put in the work, we both made compromises. We started planning intimacy nights times, when sex wasn't just a spontaneous thing but a priority. That way, I could mentally prepare, and he could feel reassured that his needs were being met. It wasn't easy at first, but I began to notice a shift in how we connected. When we had those nights, it wasn't just about sex, it was about intimacy, about connecting in a way we hadn't done in so long. We added more non-sexual touch throughout our day, holding hands, hugging, kissing, things that reminded us we were more than just parents, more than just roommates. As we started to focus on the quality of our connection instead of the frequency of sex, I noticed something remarkable. I began to want him again. The pressure was off, and suddenly, I could see him in a new light. Desiring him was no longer a chore or something I had to force myself into. It felt natural again, like we were rediscovering each other. The trip to Europe was a turning point. We hadn't been on a trip alone since our kids were born, and as much as I loved them, it felt like we had lost ourselves in the everyday chaos of parenthood. Paris, Barcelona, and a small coastal town in Italy gave us a chance to reconnect, to talk for hours, to remember the reasons we had fallen in love in the first place. The time away was a gift, a reset button for our marriage. And yes, we had incredible sex in Barcelona after too much wine, laughing in a way that reminded me of our early days together. It wasn't just the sex that changed, though, it was everything else. We started communicating with more vulnerability. He told me that he had been terrified of losing me, but even more terrified of staying in a relationship where he felt emotionally starved. I admitted that I had taken our connection for granted, that I thought it would always just work itself out. The truth was, it needed our attention, our effort, just like anything important. The most important change came when we both acknowledged our roles in the breakdown and agreed that we would keep working toward a better version of our marriage. We had setbacks, of course. We weren't magically fixed. There were nights when I was too tired for sex, and he became distant. But instead of letting that fester, we addressed it. He acknowledged that his reaction was disproportionate, and I acknowledged that I could have been more attentive to his emotional needs. We were learning how to navigate this new version of ourselves. And, as hard as it was, I could feel us becoming a team again. His friends, especially Jay and his wife, played an unexpected role in our healing. Hearing about their own struggles helped me feel less alone. It was reassuring to know that we weren't the only couple navigating these waters. And when we spent time with them, it was clear that my husband wasn't the only one who had faced these challenges. It made me realize that every couple has their own struggles. And That didn't mean we were doomed, it just meant we had to be willing to grow through the discomfort. As for his work, he had taken 3 months of unpaid leave to figure things out. And when he returned to his usual schedule, he had made changes. He no longer worked past 6 p.m., which meant we had family time every evening. He was teaching our older son coding on Saturday mornings, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride watching them together. He was committed to being present for our family, and it made me feel like we were rebuilding something strong. For my part, I started working again part-time, just 15 hours a week, doing marketing consulting. It was a refreshing change, having something that was just mine, something that was separate from being a wife and mother. It gave me a sense of independence and fulfillment that I hadn't realized I was missing. And strangely, it helped me with my intimacy as well. When I felt like myself again, I was better able to connect with him, physically and emotionally. We weren't perfect. We still had our disagreements, our moments of doubt, but we now had the tools to deal with them. We were learning how to communicate better, how to give each other space without drifting apart, and how to nurture our relationship despite the challenges we faced as parents and partners. One evening, after the kids were in bed, my husband looked at me with a mix of vulnerability and determination. Our 4-year-old had asked if we were going to live together forever, and my husband, with all the sincerity in the world, had answered, "That's the plan, buddy. Mum and Dad are working hard to make sure of that." Later that night, we lay in bed, holding each other in silence. We didn't need words. We both understood the weight of what had just been said. We were going to fight for each other. We weren't perfect, but we were going to keep trying. Our journey was far from over. It was going to take time, effort, and a lot of patience. But for the first time in months, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. We weren't just surviving, we were learning how to live, to love, to fight for each other. And that was enough for now.